Alright, welcome back to this second video in this mini series of getting you started with the new features and new tools and new enhancements to the workflows in ZBrush 2021.5. So this object that I have here is kind of like trying to emulate a more traditional sculpture out of like a very rough clay with sort of like chunks of clay. But the effect is done using some of the brushes that I customize and pretty much in the same way that I showed you how to customize your own brushes in the previous video. So let me just bring in one of those brushes and I'm going to select something like the body, which I have selected. Actually, let's just do it on this mesh right here. Actually, all of them have. Let's use this one. I have some layers that I'm going to show you the difference, kind of like the before and after. But I have this mesh here, and it's very rough. Like you can see, this, there's some holes in it and everything. There's no, I didn't spend much time putting too much effort into this. I just wanted to generate those quick shapes and use the thick skin, right? So all I did was, let's go ahead to the thick skin and make sure that it's enabled. And one of the custom brushes, again, because I'm not gonna destroy the original shape, all I'm doing is adding or subtracting volumes really quick. And let me just undo. I think that I'm actually destroying that quite a bit. Let's just change the thickness. Yeah, so that's too much. So let's go for something like this. There we go. So again, with the same brush, I'm just adding details to this piece. So that I just want to do a quick recap of what I did in the previous video. So a very simple mesh. As you can see, nothing fancy here, and it's actually pretty rough Dynamesh object. I'm just adding details, but I don't have to worry about the thickness of it, or destroying very thin areas, because I'm limiting my effect of this brush to the size or to the value that I have here in the thick skin. Right, so that's essentially what I did for the entire object. So obviously, a bit more care in some of the body shapes, but ultimately they're very, very rough. I mean, the anatomy is all over the place. I just want to have something quickly to be able to start, or to have something that looks like I just started a project of traditional clay, right? So I have the body selected, and let's go into solo mode, and you see that even there are some areas that look like a little bit sticking out more than the other ones, and that's what I had in my layers to show you. So I have this layer that I can turn on and off or reduce, and you'll see that it is pretty evident the change. Actually, I'm gonna use this icon here to turn it off, right? And that's one of the techniques or the tips that I'm gonna use, or that I'm gonna show you in this video. So you can have something like that, and very easily you can generate from this series of details something a bit more extreme like this. So I have that. That's the reason I have it in a layer, not for any other reason. In fact, I'm just gonna delete it without applying it and show you what I did. Right, so another thing that has been implemented in this version of ZBrush is the contrast slider, and it's really, really fun for this type of thing. So I'm gonna show you what that does. Again, it's pretty simple, but once you know how it works, it's just really gonna change the approach that you take to this type of projects. So this one is the one that I'm referring to, contrast, and what it does is just going to sharpen the details, but you will be able to see it in real time and determine how much contrast you're going to add. Right, so if I take this and I just push it forward, right, you can see how much I'm actually sharpening those details and enhancing some of this shape. Now, this is something that looks really cool, and just by doing that, it gives another layer of complexity and take this object to the next level. But I'm gonna go ahead and undo that because I want to be able to control where I place this contrast. So I'm gonna make use of one of the older tricks in the book, one of the oldest ones here, the morph target. And I'm gonna actually have a morph target already, so I'm gonna delete that. That was probably from the previous layer. So I'm gonna click on the store morph target, and storing a morph target basically tells ZBrush that we want to remember the current state of this model as it is, exactly as it is. And now I'm gonna take the contrast slider, push it all the way to 90 or 100 to achieve this contrast in the details. But because now we have this store morph target basically telling ZBrush what we wanted to save in terms of the previous state of this model and this new one with all the contrasted details, we can switch between the previous state and this new one. So I can click switch, right? And we can see essentially the same thing that I show you with the layer, right? So the previous state and the new one with the contrast. But what's great about this is that we can essentially remove the areas or going back to the previous state in just the areas that we want. So let's go ahead and select the morph target, or the morph brush, sorry. So this is a brush that works only if you have a store morph target. So it's kind of like an eraser brush. So let's get closer here. And I'm going to start erasing some of that change, right? And as I erase this, I'm also changing a little bit of the volume, of the general volume that I added, right? And we can also use the thick skin, right? So that's what maybe it's not hard, it's a little bit hard to see here, but I'm going to try to find an area that is pretty obvious. Yeah, maybe here. So you'll see that border the border that I'm creating when I'm using the morph target. That is because I'm using the thick skin at the same time that I'm trying to revert to the previous model, to the previous state of this model. So if I turn off this thick skin, so you're not going to have that effect anymore, right? So what this does is just allows you to revert back to that original model, and we can sort of tone down some of the effect without reducing the details everywhere else, right? So I can concentrate on areas that might look a little bit too distorted, but I can leave other ones that, you know, these areas right here, I can sort of fix by doing this. Maybe these ones are starting to get a little bit too distorted, but some of the other areas look, you know, like if I just added a piece of clay and I smushed it to attach it to the model, right? So this is something that I found to be really useful, just using that, you know, the old school morph target with the new feature of the contrast to be able to maintain a bit more control over those or what it seemed to be randomly placed details. Now, another thing that I wanted to show you is kind of like an alternative or an enhancement to the brushes that I showed you in the previous video. So one of the complex brushes in a way. So in the previous video, I showed you what to do with the elastic brush, for example. And I want to find maybe an area right here. And so this is what this brush does without thick skin. Let's enable that. This is what it does with a thick skin. Oh, by the way, let's just go ahead and remove the morph target. So just delete it. And I'm going to increase the thickness just a tiny bit more. And again, this is the one that we created in the previous video. This is what it's doing, right? Now, right now, I'm not using any alpha. So I'm going to click on the alpha palette. I'm going to use alpha 14 or maybe 58. I think 14 should be maybe 58. Has a bit more resolution, right? And it's going to sharpen those edges a bit more. Now, something that you can do as well is tweak the stroke or the settings of the stroke in the stroke palette. So in the stroke palette, what we can do is, for example, enable the roll effect. And what the roll does is just going to take that alpha and make it behave as in you're actually rolling. So it's hard to see here because of all the other settings that we already tweaked with the elastic one, but we have a repetition of the same circle over and over. So it's a slightly different effect. And what we can do with this is actually stretch that alpha. So not only we are going to roll it, but we're also going to stretch it maybe 2.57. So maybe a bit more. So now you see this is one circle that has been stretched. So is this alpha been stretched? This is another one, and here we can continue doing another one. So what this is going to allow me to do is variate kind of like the shape of what I am applying a bit more. So, you know, with a single stroke, it looks like I'm actually adding a bunch of smudges here with kind of like with my thumbs in a way. I'm going to do it here so that it's a bit more obvious and maybe with a smaller brush size. Right, so just using one single brush stroke generates a lot more detail and that's how I was able to generate all of this complexity, all of these interesting shapes in this model, which, to tell you the truth, is actually a pretty rubbish model. I really didn't spend much time trying to fix, to tweak the anatomy or anything. Is pretty basic pose, and then just using these new features and these brushes, these custom brushes, you can produce something that looks pretty complex and pretty decent, at least as a sketch, right? But there you have it. So that's just using a bit of the roll and the roll distance to, take this alpha or any other alpha for that matter, and then just tweaking it to look like you're adding a bunch of pieces. Now, one extra thing that I want to show you in this video that again, it has to do with this new set of tools, and it's more of a workflow tip, using some of these new features with some of the old ones, or the more traditional ones in a way in ZBrush. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of solo mode. So that's how I generated all of these extra bunch of pieces and the hair and all of that. So maybe I'm going to do this in a sphere so that it's clear. But again, the process is exactly the same. So I just selected a sphere, make it a polymesh 3D. I'm going to go to the geometry palette, turn that into a Dynamesh object. There we go. And into the thick skin. Now, again, here you can see the effect of that brush a little bit better. Maybe with a bit more thickness, right? And again, this is another thing that you can do, is pressing the Alt key randomly as you go through your model. So you're randomly subtracting or adding details, right, to generate this effect, which is pretty cool, I think. But anyway, I forgot what I was talking about, so let's go ahead and undo that. So the workflow, right? So if you want to add a bit more realism in terms of creating those sort of chunks of clay into your model as an additional piece of clay, something that you can do, and this is actually something that you can turn into a macro, is to use the extract function in ZBrush. So let me just turn this off. It works, the way that it works is pretty simple. So step number 1 will be to hold Control and mask an area, like so, right? Then you go to the extract here under the subtool subpalette, and this is step 2. You can click on extract, and you have a preview of how this would look in terms of the thickness, maybe from this angle actually. Let's do that again. Extract, so pretty thin. So you can take this thickness, and this is a different thickness from the thick skin, but it sort of like follows the same principle in terms of how you determine the thickness. So let's go for 0.1, almost 0.09 extract. Now you have this piece, right? And this is a preview. So if you're happy with the thickness, then you click accept. So this is a step 3, right? So now ZBrush from that mask generated this piece as a new subtool. Right, so now the 4th step would be to just clear this mask, and so this is a new subtool, right, that we have here. The 5th step in this case would be to go to the geometry palette, turn that into a Dynamesh object with a standard resolution, kind of like the default one. So we can now go ahead and play with the elastic brush and the things and the thick skin, right? One extra step that I would do would be to polish this. So again, all of these steps that I'm giving you could be recorded into a macro that you just press once every time that you want to add a new piece. So if we go to the deformation palette, we can go to the polish by, let's just go to polish and just add maybe a polish of 2. And you see that smooths those corners. And the next step would be to just simply add the thick skin. So adding thick skin, it behaves in the same way as the sphere behaved before, and that will be the end of your macro if you want to create a macro following all of those steps, and that will be the end of your macro. Every time that you press it after masking an area, it generates a piece like this. You have the thick skin, you have a brush that works nicely with the thick skin, and then you can just start affecting it like so, right? I'm gonna go ahead and bring in another brush that I built that hopefully is gonna give us a better effect, or a more obvious one. Yeah, I think this one is fine. Right, we can have a a bit more resolution in this Dynamesh. Redynamesh, enable thick skin. There we go. All right, so let's say that that's what you want to generate, and then you want to do another one. It's just going back to that base. This would be the equivalent to the body that I showed you before. So you can take this one, hold control, and you can do actually any shape that you want, right? And go through that process. That's what I'm saying. This is a pretty standard process, but you can just turn it into a macro. So again, accept or extract, accept, clear the mask, turn it into a Dynamesh, maybe adding a bit of polish, turning the thick skin, and then you start adding those details, right? And all of these ones are going to be individual pieces, so you will be able to arrange them really nicely. So let's go back to the base. Again, hold control. I'm going to do this one more time. Extract, accept, clear mask, turn this into a Dynamesh, polish, thick skin, and then we're adding details like crazy, right? So this is a really, really powerful technique, and you can start, mixing things around a lot more. And again, remember that this is, all of this one is playing at a 20 or a value of 20 in the thickness. So if I want to increase, let's say, the reach of this particular one, I can increase the thickness here, and now I can mix and blend this even more, right? But I'm not destroying the original shape because I can only push this as far as this number let me go, right? But all of these pieces are individual pieces that I created very, very, very simple with this this technique. So I can also take something like the move brush, for instance. Let's filter by the M, say the move brush, and I can just more manually go ahead and do that, right? Oh, I still have, that's another great thing, right? So the move brush will also work with the thick skin. So if I do this, you'll see that I only move this bead only based on that, that thickness. So I can turn this off just so that we can reposition those bits and pieces. This one still has the thickness. There we go. There we go. All right. So again, that's another way to generate something that looks a lot more realistic, varying a bit of the thickness, and not only this, I mean, you can take this extract and change and vary the original thickness of the piece of clay that you're adding. But overall, once you do this multiple times, you end up with a bunch of subtools that you can use and then merge together. And that's how I kind of like build some of the most complex one. I just add a few and then Dynamesh everything together. That's how I generated this big piece, that one, right? And the rest basically with the same technique. So hopefully this is of help, and in the next video I'm going to show you yet another technique and something else that comes with this new version of ZBrush. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.